Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's Walt here from Down the Block Sports, and today I want to talk about the NFL. Week 1 is over. Fantasy football owners are looking to find that steal in free agency early on. What I want to talk about today is who's some guys that impressed me in Week 1 and some names you should keep an eye on the free agent waiver wire market. Again, I'm Alec Walt. This is Down the Block Sports. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more of my exclusive content. Yes, week 1 of the NFL season is over. Fantasy football owners are looking on the waiver wire right now to acquire some free agent talent. And I'm going to go by position for some players I think you should consider picking up for the rest of the 2022 season. Now, let's be real here. It's early. You don't want to overreact to week 1. We see some players kind of blow up onto the scene early on and then fade away. If you have an early waiver wire pick, you want to make sure you're making the right selection. So when I look across the board right now, let's start with the quarterback position. I think this one is easy. Yes, Carson Wentz won't be facing the Jacksonville Jaguars every single week, but if you are someone who owns Dak Prescott, you could look inside that division for a QB to replace him. The Carson Wentz era is off to a great start with the Washington Commanders. I mean, it shouldn't really surprise us. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars. They added Jahan Dotson in the draft, Curtis Samuel coming back healthy, who was a free agent signing last year. Terry McLaurin obviously is their number one receiver. Didn't have the best week 1 game, but Carson Wentz had 4 touchdown passes, and all three of his targets, those 3 guys I just mentioned, all were on the receiving end of those. I mean, he had 313 yards, 4 touchdowns, over 27 fantasy points. His schedule next week is against the Detroit Lions. If you guys watch any of the Eagles games this past week, Jalen Hurts had a hell of a performance against them, and we expect that to carry over. I mean, Carson Wentz has always been a great quarterback when healthy. The problem is he hasn't always been the healthiest. And last year, when he did play some games, he was in such a run-heavy offense that, the Indianapolis Colts would get away with Jonathan Taylor running like he's on fire and still finding able to win some games. I think the Washington Commanders are going to pass the ball a lot. I mean, yes, Antonio Gibson's a solid running back. They are expected to get Robinson back, who was unfortunately shot in Washington, D.C., as their backup when they do get some depth back on that roster. But when I look at the Washington Commanders right now and Wentz is owned in 16.6% of ESPN fantasy leagues, if you're looking for a quarterback, you're looking for some depth, you're looking for someone who could step up even next week and beyond. I mean, their receiving trio is legit. Antonio Gibson is a very good running back. Their schedule is, especially early on, and with the injury to Dak Prescott in a division that's very up and down, not the toughest. There's a lot of winnable games here for the Washington Commanders and a lot of performances where Carson Wentz can have a huge game. So I don't expect all 3 of his top targets to score touchdowns every single week. But one thing I've learned early on about Carson Wentz and the Washington Commanders is that he has great chemistry with his receivers, and he has some upside to be a very solid fantasy contributor for a long time to come. Now, running back, in my opinion, there's not much depth, but if you're going to use a waiver wire pick, it's going to go to the running back for the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, Elijah Mitchell's out. Kyle Shanahan, for years, has always been a great head coach for running backs who, if you're a fantasy football owner, you want the number 1 running back for a Kyle Shanahan offense. And I mean, Elijah Mitchell's a great running back. He unfortunately is injured out for an extended period of time. That means Jeff Wilson Jr. is on his way up the depth chart, expect to be the number 1 running back. They're going to need to run the football. I don't know if you guys watched that. The weather was horrendous in Chicago. I mean, I don't think what you saw last week is what you're going to see every week out of the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, Trey Lance was playing in terrible weather. The offense didn't look amazing. There was no George Kittle, who I think is going to help a ton when he gets back in the middle of the field. But in a game where you had to rely on running the football and, they didn't really do much offensively. And I expect that to change when they are out of that bad weather environment. I think this offense sooner or later needs to open up Trey Lance and hit some of the fastest receivers down the field in the league with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. But When they start opening up this offense, it's going to lead to more running lanes for Jeff Wilson Jr., who is clearly the number one back on this team. I don't expect him to be the second coming of a Derrick Henry type guy. I do think we need to, limit our expectations. Kyle Shanahan is also known for using his depth in certain situations, but if you're looking for a running back and you look at free agency, it's not great. I mean, the best option here is by far Jeff Wilson Jr. So if you have a top fantasy waiver wire pick, you drafted towards the back, and you have that number one waiver wire selection, if you want to burn it early, it seems like the best option, unless you have a ton of running backs, is to go after someone like Jeff Wilson Jr. At the wide receiver position, this is where it gets pretty deep because there were some guys who really stepped up in that week one. One guy in particular, DJ Shark. And the Detroit Lions are a team I expect to pass the ball a lot. Yes, their identity of their offense is with DeAndre Swift, but they gave up a lot of points last week to the Eagles. And yes, the Eagles offense is great, with A.J. Brown really showing he's worth it with that week one performance here. But there's going to be a lot of games where they're not going to have the lead, where they can just hand the ball off to Swift, kill the clock, and rely on their defense to step up. I don't think that's a reality. Amon-Ra St. Brown is obviously their number one wide receiver. He had an awesome game, but in that week two performance, DJ Shark had 8 targets. He had 4 catches. He scored a touchdown. Do I expect him to score a touchdown every single week? No, I do not, but I expect Jared Goff to be throwing the football. And when I look at this offense that doesn't have Jameson Williams, while Williams is out, the guy who's going to be replacing him is DJ Shark. So if you're looking for a flex option, you're looking for a wide receiver 3 bench fill-in, I expect for the first 8 or so weeks, DJ Shark to be a consistent contributor on this offense. He's an athletic guy who was kind of trapped in Jacksonville. And I feel like a lot of players just kind of forgot who he was. Jacksonville was not great for him in his career. This is his real chance to potentially have that, a breakout type season. Now, I do think things will change once Williams comes back. I do think he's going to be a focal point in this offense, which is why they drafted him in the first round, even while he was injured. But while Williams is gone, keep an eye on DJ Shark on the waiver wire. Now, for some other wide receivers, I'm going to go back to the Washington Commanders. I mentioned these 2 names earlier. Obviously, their number one is Terry McLaurin. He didn't get a ton of catches last week. Yes, he did score a touchdown for some of you who had him on the roster, but I think there are 2 names in Washington that could step up. One of them is Jahan Dotson. The other is Curtis Samuel. Now, when I look at the 2 of them, I think the better option in fantasy is Curtis Samuel, because I think Curtis Samuel has more consistency behind him. Jahan Dotson's a burner. He's the type of guy that can get you a huge touchdown, but I don't think that will come every single week. When you look at week 1, Dotson had 5 targets, 3 catches, 2 touchdowns. He's not going to get 2 touchdowns for every 3 catches the rest of the season. Samuel didn't score a touchdown, he did score a touchdown, but he had 11 targets. Wentz was feeding him the football. If everyone's focusing on the outside receiver, that gives Samuel a great chance to step up in this offense. Week 1 for him was spectacular. Yes, he only had 55 yards, so hopefully he can get the ball a little bit further down the field off of 8 catches. Yards per catch, really not that great, but 11 targets for the true number 2 receiver. Again, there's going to be games where Jahan Dotson absolutely explodes. This dude is fast. This dude can catch. When I'm looking on the waiver wire for someone who can be a consistent contributor into this offense, I expect more from Terry McLaurin throughout the year. But between the 2 other receivers there in Washington, I do expect more consistent success from Curtis Samuel. Jarvis Landry had a great debut for the New Orleans Saints. It looks weird that he's in that jersey, but I do think it's great that he's back in that offense. Michael Thomas did step up. Chris Olave looks awesome, but when you look at 9 targets, 7 catches, 114 yards, Jameis Winston looked to him in the key situations. Yes, he didn't score as many touchdowns as Michael Thomas, but it looks like Jarvis Landry and Jameis Winston have developed some great chemistry. Yes, he's owned in 42% of leagues, so he's not in every single league that's available, but when you're looking for him when it matters most, If Michael Thomas steps up and leaves him more one-on-one opportunities and defenses don't look at him as strong as Michael Thomas, I think Jarvis Landry is another name that you should look out on the free agent market. Finally, tight end is a mess unless you own Travis Kelce. If you'd use the top 2 pick on Travis Kelce, it's clearly paying off. When you looked at tight ends across the board, there were a lot of teams that had tight ends that absolutely did not show up. On the free agent market, you're not going to get much better than O.J. Howard and Hayden Hurst. If I were you, I wouldn't use a waiver wire selection on them, but I do think they're names that should absolutely be monitored at an absolutely terrible position for fantasy owners. Hopefully, when George Kittle comes back, if you're a George Kittle owner, he will be a solid contributor, but I don't expect much out of Houston's offense, but it seems like he is going to be a threat every time they're in the goal line. And in one of the deepest offenses that has the best offensive trio in the league in Cincinnati, Hayden Hurst had 8 targets. Yes, I expect the big 3 there to contribute every single week, but 2 names to keep an eye on tight end. If O.J. Howard keeps scoring and Hurst keeps going on passing routes, Burrow's going to sling it. Houston has to throw to someone at the goal line. Keep an eye on those 2 names, but I don't recommend especially using a waiver wire selection on them. So some names I don't exactly think you should pick up that had good week 1s. Not buying Dontrell Hillard. Obviously, when you look at Tennessee, their number 1 running back is Derrick Henry. That's not going to change. Devin Duvernay had 4 catches, 2 touchdowns. I do think he'll be looked at, but when you look at the offense here, obviously Lamar Jackson, they're going to be a run-heavy offense, especially when J.K. Dobbins comes back and is a full contributor to this offense. I do think at the end of the day, Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews are the best options in this offense. So he'll have some breakout games, but I do not think he'll be a consistent threat every single week from a fantasy perspective. So it was a fun week 1, unless, of course, you root for this team. That was not fun at all. But you have some chances to land some big names early here in free agency. So you need a QB, get Carson Wentz. Need a running back? Jeff Wilson Jr. Some wide receivers? Curtis Samuel, DJ Shark. Tight end's going to be a crapshoot every single week. But 2 guys who were former first-round picks absolutely stepped up in their performances. So what do you think of the waiver wire this week in fantasy football? Feel free to give me your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more of my exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you very soon.